The television studio was buzzing with energy as the live audience settled into their seats. Tonight's guest was none other than Al Pacino, a living legend in Hollywood. The 84-year-old actor, known for his electrifying performances in The Godfather, Scarface, and Heat, had spent decades in the industry, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest actors of all time. Tonight, he was making a rare talk show appearance to discuss his latest film. But, as was often the case with celebrities of his stature, the conversation wasn't going to stay on topic for long. Sitting across from him was Ethan Reynolds, a well-known journalist who had built his career on hard-hitting, often controversial interviews. Reynolds had a reputation for pushing boundaries, asking uncomfortable questions, and digging deep into personal lives. He thrived on catching celebrities off guard, and tonight his target was Al Pacino. The interview began smoothly, with Pacino discussing his passion for acting, his experiences on set, and his thoughts on Hollywood's evolution. The audience was captivated by his storytelling, hanging on to every word. But Reynolds had other plans. Leaning forward, the journalist flashed a knowing smirk and tapped his cue cards against his knee. The playful, light-hearted tone of the conversation was about to shift. "Now, Al," Reynolds said, lowering his voice slightly, as if he was about to share a secret with the audience. "You've been in this industry for over 5 decades. You've played gangsters, detectives, lovers, and everything in between. But the one role people seem to know the least about," he paused for effect, letting the silence stretch, "is the real Al Pacino." The audience chuckled softly, sensing the change in tone. Pacino raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Reynolds continued, "You've always been private about your personal life. No social media, no flashy headlines, no tell-all books. But people are curious, Al. Who is the man behind the legend?" Pacino let out a small chuckle, rubbing his chin. "I'm just a guy who loves acting," he said simply. But Reynolds wasn't satisfied. "Come on, Al," the journalist pressed. "There's got to be more to it than that. Let's talk about relationships." Pacino exhaled slightly, but kept his cool. "You've never been married, despite having 3 children with different women. Some might say that's unusual for a man of your success. Why never settle down?" A hush fell over the crowd. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The question wasn't just personal, it was intrusive. Pacino tilted his head, studying Reynolds with a small, amused smile. He had faced tough questions before. But this was something else. The silence stretched. The journalist, sensing he had cornered his guest, leaned back smugly in his chair. Then finally Pacino spoke. "You know, Ethan," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you remind me of a guy I played once." Reynolds blinked, caught off guard. "Which one?" Pacino leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "The kind of guy who thinks he's always the smartest one in the room." The audience gasped, then erupted into laughter and applause. Reynolds shifted in his seat, but Pacino wasn't done. "Let me tell you something about marriage, about love, about life," he continued, his voice commanding the room. "Some people are meant to build a home. Others, we build moments." Reynolds opened his mouth to interject, but Pacino held up a hand. "I never wanted to be the guy who gave half of himself to a family while the other half was chasing dreams. Acting isn't just a job to me, Ethan. It's who I am. And the people who've been in my life, they've known that. They've understood that. Because you can love someone and still know that you don't belong to them. Not completely." The studio fell silent. For the first time that night, Reynolds had nothing to say. Pacino sat back, letting his words settle. "Now you tell me," he added after a beat, "is that the kind of answer you were looking for? Or do you just want something that'll get you clicks?" The audience erupted in applause. Reynolds forced a laugh, trying to regain control. "Well, Al, that's certainly a unique perspective." Pacino just smiled. "I thought so." The journalist glanced down at his cue cards, clearly flustered. But he wasn't done trying to push buttons. He had one more card up his sleeve. And in the next segment, he would try one last time to get under Al Pacino's skin. What he didn't realize? He was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. The tension in the studio was palpable. Al Pacino had just flipped the conversation on its head, turning the journalist's intrusive questioning into a lesson in life and wisdom. The audience was hanging on every word, some nodding in admiration, others murmuring in approval. But Ethan Reynolds, the ambitious journalist, wasn't ready to give up. He had built his career on getting celebrities to slip up, to give sound bites that would go viral, that could be turned into sensational headlines. And he wasn't leaving this interview without one. Reynolds took a deep breath, forcing a chuckle, trying to act like he was still in control. He shuffled his cue cards, then looked up with a smirk. "All right, Al, you got me there," he said. "That was a hell of an answer." Pacino simply nodded, calm and unreadable. Reynolds leaned forward again. "But let's move on to another topic, shall we?" He let the pause linger before adding, "Your past." The audience stiffened. Pacino raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Reynolds knew he was pushing his luck, but he also knew the audience was eating this up. "You grew up in the South Bronx. You didn't know your father. You struggled to make ends meet. But now you're one of the greatest actors of all time. Quite the journey, right?" Pacino nodded slowly. "It's been a ride." Reynolds' smile widened. He thought he saw an opening. "But let's talk about the rougher times, Al. The days when you were just another struggling actor. The arrests, the rumors of substance abuse, the failed relationships, the loneliness. Do you ever look back at your life and wonder if all of this was worth it?" The audience gasped. A few people even shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pacino, however, did not move. He simply stared at Reynolds, his piercing gaze holding the journalist in place. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then in a voice calm, controlled, yet dangerously sharp, he spoke. "You know, Ethan, there's a difference between being a journalist and being a gossip columnist." The audience erupted in laughter and applause. Reynolds froze. Pacino leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto the journalist like a hawk studying its prey. "I've lived a life, kid, a real life. And you sit here, flipping through your cue cards, looking for the next question that'll get you 1 million views on social media. But let me ask you something." Reynolds swallowed. "Go ahead." Pacino's voice lowered, but his words carried the weight of decades of experience. "When you go home at night, when the cameras are off, when there's no one left to impress, do you ever wonder what it's like to actually feel something real?" The studio went dead silent. Reynolds' smirk disappeared completely. Pacino did not break eye contact. "Because let me tell you something, kid," Pacino continued. "I don't need to sit here and justify my life to you. I don't need to explain why I made the choices I made. I felt pain. I felt loss. I felt joy. And I felt love. And at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror and say, that was a life worth living." Reynolds gripped his cue cards tightly, his knuckles turning white. He was losing the room, and he knew it. But Pacino wasn't done. He sat back and let the silence breathe before adding one final blow. "Can you say the same, Ethan?" The crowd gasped, then exploded into applause. Reynolds looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stammered, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The moment was already bigger than him. Pacino had just turned the tables in a way that no one would forget. The interview ended shortly after, but the impact was felt across the country. "Al Pacino destroys journalist in interview. You won't believe what he said." "Veteran actor humiliates journalist who tried to dig into his past." "Al Pacino shuts down a talk show host. The internet is loving it." Clips of the exchange went viral overnight. Even people who weren't Al Pacino fans had to admit, this is how you handle an intrusive journalist. Pacino just gave a master class in shutting someone down with class. This is why he's a legend. The video was shared by celebrities, actors, and even journalists who agreed that Reynolds had gone too far. The talk show, it became infamous for that one moment. And Ethan Reynolds? He tried to defend himself on social media, claiming that he was just doing his job. But the internet wasn't having it. Doing your job doesn't mean disrespecting a legend. Pacino showed more wisdom in 5 minutes than this guy has in his whole career. Maybe next time, show some respect. As for Al Pacino, he went on with his life unfazed as he always had. Because in the end, legends don't need to explain themselves. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to grow. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Let us know in the comments below.